Okay, we'll go ahead and get things started. I'm going to kick back over to Discord real quick here and see where we're at. Hello, hello, can you hear me? Okay, back to there.
I can hear you.
Okay, I probably have something weird on Discord audio again. Seb, can you say something again real quick?
I can hear you.
Okay, there it goes. Yeah, there's always weird setting on there.
I can hear you.
Okay, there it goes. Yeah, there's always weird.
Now you are super quiet.
Am I now? Oh, sorry, there's reverb.
Awesome. Now it's awesome.
Gotcha. Yep, still learning some of the streaming stuff. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good for me too.
Great. Yep, and feel free to mention if anything is quirky. But for now, we'll go ahead and kick into things. And if you are in the voice chat, do make sure to mute Twitch because otherwise it's going to give you a little bit of a headache. Okay. So, welcome everyone to Rebuilding Rails Chapter 2. In this particular session, we're going to be taking a little bit of a look into how controllers work and a little bit more in depth with our ruler gem. So the chapter starts out with going back to our ruler gem, and we're going to be in library, rulers, version, and we're going to increment this one because we're in chapter 2. So I'm going to increase that size a little bit. Got that. Okay, so that update went through. Yep, and feel free to ask questions in either Twitch or Discord or anything else, and feel free to flag me if I don't see one of those. Okay. So we start out with explaining a little bit of what Rack is doing, and let me pull up that particular file over here. So we'll notice, and I'm going to comment this out and this out real quick, just so we don't have too much noise there. What exactly are these three things doing? Well, the first one we have is the HTTP response. So 200 is okay, and you're going to have various other status codes for things like 400s being front-end error, 500s being back-end error, but we won't get into that too much. Okay, and then the next is the content type. This could be something like text HTML. We could say it's JSON. We could say it's a lot of things. I chose to put this in the constant, and one habit I have is I like to be able to see or name concepts which aren't immediately clear to me. That way I know what I'm doing. In the book, we'll also mention you could do JSON, XML, RSS, or a whole bunch of other things. And last one is the body, which could be a multi-part over here. So the book mentions the environment, and there was one question in channel of what exactly the environment is and where that's coming from. This is something that Rack is going to pass in. Rack is kind of our baseline server that's going to handle interacting with a lot of these things. So today we'll be spending a lot more time inspecting what is Rack doing over here and what actually is environments. Okay. So it looks like we're going to start out with routing over here. So in the book, this is about page 35. And we're going to start with a URL. And what the book is wanting us to cover is something vaguely like this, which is whatever the host happens to be, the category, and the action. Okay, so we have lib rulers. Let's go ahead and get rulers and then do routing over here. We'll save that, and then we actually need a routing. So we'll go ahead and save that as routing. Put that in its to do. And then we have a few updates we're doing over here. So I'm going to take this stuff out real quick. The environment, so the reason they're doing an underscore beforehand is traditionally in Ruby, if something's not being used, use an underscore before something just to say, here's a name for something, but we're not actually going to use it. Rubicop will respect that as well for this variable isn't used. But now, since we're going to actually be playing with environment, we're going to want that. So just to type in what we have real quick for the new call method, first off, we're going to need that environment. This is coming straight from the book. I am going to use a little bit of a longer form of this for action instead of act. Send action, and we are going to take this, put it into here, and none of these methods are quite really defined. We don't have the class or the controller yet, so we're going to be getting into that in a second. So we'll go ahead and have that controller over there like the book is mentioning. Right. So no one's mentioning book variables short because book space. Admittedly, I do something very similar whenever I'm doing presentations, which is I tend to shorten a lot of things. Is it? Okay, 1 second. Yep, feel free to mention if anything is too small on here. Is that a little bit better? Good? Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, if font size or anything too small, absolutely feel free to request that. Okay. So the idea here is that whenever application call hits, and this again is something coming from Rack gets that application, and just as a refresher, let's see here, where is that config? We have config.ru here. So best quotes, application new. So Rack, again, this is just a method, is getting a hold of its application. This application over here is going to be coming from right here. We don't care too much about that. And then let's comment out this method just so we don't have to worry about it for now. That was just to demonstrate what we could potentially do with the inherited thing there. But anyway, so rack gets application, and then rack is going to use the call method on that application, or for Open Rulers, it's going to use this, and it's going to call it with environment information. I'll probably use some of the longer form things here just for that. Okay. So the idea for this particular part is that the environment is going to have the URL somewhere in there. And what we're going to want is something like my domain / controller name / action. So that's what we're trying to get here is the controller name and the action. That way we can instantiate a controller right here, and then we can send it one of those actions. So this is our generic controller, kind of like what action controller might be. Okay, so let's go over to routing. Get controller and action out of the environment. Environment path info. Okay. So that's actually doing something interesting. Let's take one of those example URLs if I can find it again. If you didn't know already, you can actually pass a second parameter to split. So if I were to split, normally you get back all of those. But if I happen to say 3 or 2, you'll notice it only splits into so many entities. This can be useful, especially for some of the things like what we're trying to do here. Okay, so we have that. So if we happen to have the example, and I'll just put these all in comments right above here. So if this was the URL, we get people / create / whatever in the world happens after here. So first step would be capitalize that. Second step would be to add controller to that. Controller class, I'm pulling this up a little bit. So what we're getting right here on line 15 hello, hello. Glad to see you here. Yep, so object const get allows us to get a constant. Let's see if it'll work up here. Yep. So we can get a constant by the name on that. In this case, we'll have people controller that we're going to define sometime later. Well, this is more of an example. This is the far more generic area of that. Okay, so going over to best quotes again. Okay, so here is asking, would I write similar constants in production? Yes and no and kind of. It depends on how obvious something might be. A lot of times I'll write comments to clarify what especially magical things in Ruby might be doing. Because for me, I'll know more intuitively what some of these things are doing. For someone else who's reading the code for the first time, it may be confusing, like why in the world they do that, especially if I'm using something like, say, triple equals explicitly. For most people, it'd be like, what in the world's that doing? I have no idea. For me, I'd be like, well, obviously they're trying to make some type of query language here. So I try and optimize as much as possible for readability and understandability whenever I'm writing production code. So if the comment there makes it a little bit easier for anyone coming in without context to know what's going on, I will very likely add that. Okay. App/controllers/quotes controller. Okay, we'll go ahead and copy this over. I need to figure out what's doing the auto formatting there, because sometimes it's wrong. Okay, so this is actually using our rulers controller, which is going to be very similar to application controller that you might see in Rails or any of that. Okay. And then we're going to get into a little bit of auto loading, which is how exactly does it know that we need to load this controller? And this is over on page 3738. Go back over to application here. In there, and okay. So this can be a little bit confusing, so let's get into this real quick. Load path is where Ruby looks for things. So for Rails, you can just include this by name and say, I want quotes controller. But where is quotes controller? What we're doing here is saying, Ruby, if you're looking for things, also make sure to look in where is this file location, so the current directory of that, and then we're going to go down one level. So from application, we get config, which is going to be the directory name. We're going to go up one, and then we're going to go into app and then into controllers and say anything in controllers should now be something that we look for if we're trying to figure out where this thing might be. So that's what allows us to get quotes controller right here. So we'll go back over to best quotes, make sure that we have all that. Where is the rack up thingy? And we'll go ahead and pull back up Chrome. Too many things open again. No method, get controller and action. Okay, let's do some debugging real quick. It helps if I save files. Uninitialize constant controller. Right, okay. So what you just saw is that we don't have a way to deal with anything where we request the base path. So the book actually mentioned it, said if you didn't quite get it, make sure to include quote/a quote in the URL to get that. Otherwise, you get uninitialized constant controller. So why exactly we get that error? Well, let's take a brief look into it. Oh, I really don't like that. Yeah, this is Ruby pet peeve for me, is this type of weird hanging indentation thing. Anyway, ignore that. So if we happen to try and get controller over here and the path info, well, tell you what, let's do this. Just so we can see some of the debugging information right here, we'll go ahead and refresh this once. You'll also notice this little favicon thing, which the book does mention in a second, but let's give that a bit. Okay. Man, that locked the heck out of my thing. No, I don't need you. Anyway, yeah, let's not get the entire environment. The environment has a lot of information. We only really care about the path info for now. Okay, go back over here. I'll explain that in a second. So the path we're getting right here is quote/a quote. So if we happen to put that up here in a comment, just so we have that. Let's say we go back to that IRB and then say split that into 4. We'll notice that we have whatever the prefix was, quotes, a quote, and if there anything after that, we get something like that. But if we happen to request an empty page, that's where you get into the issue with controllers, because your path is effectively going to be empty. So if we hit back, and then go back over here, just so we have a little bit of clear space here. Okay, so we have the favorite icon there, and then we have path is equal to slash. So that's where we get into the issue with this little home page right here, which we will be fixing in a second. Okay. So the first thing the book mentions on page 38 and 39 is the favicon, which is kind of, if you ever see a page, this little icon that's right where the globe is, like on Twitter you'll have a bird, or Twitch you'll have their little logo or anything. That's the favicon. So right now, whenever that's requested for the web page, that's going to confuse it, because we have a routing system which only knows how to really deal with our controller actions. So if we're looking at doing something with that, we can absolutely patch hack that, and the book mentions that we can do something along the lines of this. which it will say ideal. No. Does it matter? Well, not really. Because what we're trying to do here is say if it's the favorite icon, don't bother, it's not really worth it. So if we restart that, hit that, go back over to Chrome, you see this is a problem with me renaming things, is I get in trouble. Man, that's pesky. I don't know what exactly is autocorrecting on my stuff like that, but that's getting annoying. Okay. So let's see about this error. What exactly have I done on this one? No method error 404 for new integer. Now how is that getting that? Oh, okay. Good call, good call. Yep, this is why I need to pay attention to the book. Okay, there we go. So if we do that, that should work. Okay, now we have something a little bit cleaner. Okay, so that gets us over to exercises, but before we get too much into that, do we have any questions or anything people want to cover real quick? If not, we will go into a few of the exercises real quick. So in the quotes controller, tell you what. We will use this real quick. So for those of you who are not aware of what this is called a here doc, and the tilde means anything before here. Go ahead and crop the white space, so all this will be gone. If I happen to do this instead, it would take all that white space, so frequently you probably want the tilde version of that. But the reason why it's mentioning this is because we want to put the environment in here, just as some debugging information. Just make sure that I spelled that right. Environment. Okay, so that works. And we can give that a shot. Okay. So yeah, this is going to be a little bit long. What was that method? there's a JSON pretty generate somewhere in here. We might be able to leverage a little bit to make this a tinge more readable. We'll see if that works. Okay, that's a little bit better. So now we're able to get a few more things out of here. Oh, right. If you ever want a really fun rabbit hole, try and figure out why in the world every user agent starts with Mozilla, because that'll lead you down a fun one. But anyway, that's a little bit more readable. And if we go down, we will have the path info. Yeah, there it is. So path info is what we were using before, but Rack also gives us a lot more information, such as user agent, host, connection, request URI, request path, gateway, server protocol, a bunch of other things like that. So there's a lot of power in Rack for what you can really do with this if you want. You don't have to, but it's nice to know it's there sometimes. Okay, and then request method is get. So for things like post or put or delete or any of those other methods, you notice this would change over there, and the book is mentioning that about page 42. So this is a good way to debug to see what exactly is Rails or Rack getting hold of and what can you potentially do with it. Now, Rails will sometimes have this only in development mode to where it'll give you some additional information or context if you happen to turn these things on. Just make sure not to have some of these things on whenever you hit production, because otherwise people will be able to enumerate your server and find out potentially some bad information about it. Okay. So going into exercise 2 over here, if we happen to have an issue over here, that would end up crashing the entire thing, and you'll get huge amounts. Identify method exception. Did I call it exception? Oh, right. Yeah, I have to restart server for that. Okay, so that's actually what we want. So we got raised an issue. And then the book is saying that chapter 8, we're going to take a lot more of a deep look into Rack and where all these pages are coming from and all these little niceties. Like you'll notice that you can have the entire environment here for debugging things on what's going on, various cookies, get, post data, other things like that, and it'll give you a little bit of a backtrace to say, here's where the issue actually happened. Okay, so if we go back to controller send, which would be over in rulers here. So there are a couple of ways you could do this with begin and rescue. The first is something like this. The second is because begin and rescue happen to be an expression, you can actually do this as well. And that'll give you the same results. Now, the question is, if you hit something like this, should it also return something like 500 here? that's the case, I would say the answer should probably be yes, but we won't mess with that too much for now. Now we do still have the issue over here, which is that we don't really have anything for slash. So exercise 3 gets into that a little bit. Let's see here. So there are a couple ways we could look into this. It probably won't matter too much on that. Okay, so we'll notice that's a 404 right there. So what we're doing here is enumerating what files are explicitly not going to be found. In this case, anything which happens to be a literal slash or slash favicon.ico. So the book mentions we could do a couple of different things with this. The first of which is return the content of a known file, like say index.html. The second is we could look for an index action. The third is we could try a redirect for saying some headers. We probably won't play too much with that for now, but we should probably have a slightly different response for slash versus favicon. So let's say favicon will go ahead and pull over here. And we can name this root over here. Go and refresh that, and we'll get slightly different responses for both of those. Just for sake of curiosity, I do not entirely know what it's going to do with that if I do give a response body. Okay, so it will give me some type of data. For me, the constant thing is more of a habit, just to try and make it as understandable as possible why I don't have particular things. And let's see here, if we go back over to routing on this, we're going to have that. We're going to have the controller thing. We could probably do some additional rescues here just so we get some more data. we might leave that as an exercise for folks. So I think that's all we have for a lot of this chapter. Let's go ahead and take a look through some of the rest of it. Yep, it looks like that's about all we have for chapter 2. So is there anything anyone else would like to explore today or kind of play through? If you'd like, we can add some error handling to get controller in action, kind of go through how I might think about that at least. Sounds good, sounds good. Let's say something along the lines of could do something there, which is if both of those are bad, we can turn back an empty array, and then we can go back over to controllers and say something along the lines of if class happens to be nil, actually, tell you what, let's take this entire thing and move that into there. So we can have those. Okay, so we have a generic server error. I mean, there are probably some nice ways we could go about this, but for now we'll do this, which is if we don't have something, like let's say doesn't exist, no action, we'll get that. Make sure we have that. I think that should update things. Nope. Okay. Get controller in action, go back to routing. And for those of you who weren't here last time, this is a new thing in Ruby 3+, which is called punning. It's effectively the same as saying this for all those attributes. Make sure we have that installed, go for that. Hit back over here. Then let's see here, controller doesn't exist. Action, no action. Okay, so if those two are empty, we get that. so that's a slight fix there, which is we do have a controller and we do have something else to work with. So now we can actually use that. So now we have an internal server area that we can actually play with. But these are just kind of experimentations for ergonomics of things we could do to make this perhaps a little bit nicer for people to play with. Anyway, I think that's about all I have for today. Are there any other questions or things people want to play with? Okay, well, if that's the case, we'll go ahead and call it a day and go from there. Feel free anytime to hop over to Discord and ask additional questions, clarifications, anything else, and we can try and work through those. But in the meantime, have a great weekend, and I'll see everyone later.